Hello, everyone. As you're coming in, hope you're having a nice day, afternoon, evening. We will do introductions in a second, but if you want to let us know in the chat where you're dialing in from and what have you got as a drink on the ready? I've got some coffee because it's now mid-afternoon. Toby, what about you?
Over here. Like already drank too much actually.
We have,
Right.
yeah, we
Yeah.
have this joke internally at work about ABH, always be hydrating, particularly for these streams, because yeah, if you're talking a lot, mouth gets dry, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah, indeed. And then you get this, yeah, it gets stuck. Yeah.
Sick. I can see we've got some people coming dialing from Pakistan, from Port Boringall, Ohio. That's not boring. That's great. Dario from London. And then, yeah, let us know what your drink of choice is. Have you got coffee? Have you got tea? Have you got water? Got something maybe a little bit more exciting? Maybe it's your
Just triggered that meme in my head. Now, what's your drink of choice?
Oh no, I don't have a slide for that. So uh, wait a couple more minutes, but we're already at 255. So we also don't forget to switch to everyone in the chat. It's very nice that we're getting loads of messages via hosts and panelists, but this is the default of Zoom. We can't change it, sadly. So it's only Toby and myself that are seeing these messages otherwise. James, who's sitting in the background. But yeah, let us know where you're dialing in from and we will get started. Just a bit of housekeeping before we do intros. The session's going to be recorded. It's going to be available on YouTube. If you've got any questions for Toby at the end, we will have time for Q&A. So please use the Q&A button that should be inside the panel. I will try and keep an eye on questions that come up in the chat, but if they're in the Q&A, then you can also upvote them. Other people ask a good question that you also think should be answered. As I said before, please set your chat to everyone. Otherwise, only the hosts and panelists, only Toby and I will see your messages. So it'd be nice to keep the chat flowing. And of course, please abide by our code of conduct, which is our speaker today has put a lot of time and effort into this presentation, and also just be respectful and kind to everyone else who's here. With that done, my name's Hugo. I'm a designer advocate at Figma. I have been here for about 2 years, and we spend a lot of time chatting with members of the design community and development community and all of that kind of stuff. So I will hand over now to Toby to introduce himself before he hands over to his presentation.
Hey, great. Thanks, Hugo. Yeah, my name is Toby. I'm a product designer here at Adyen already since 2017. And I am working mostly on our in-person payments product.
I'll let you take over the presentation and let me know if you have an issue with this sharing screen. And I've just switched audio, so hopefully that might make the sound a bit better when I come back on.
Not for me, but okay. Oh yeah, I'm gonna continue.
Yeah, we're all good. Give the
That was not intention. Try to move that beautiful Zoom ball out of the way. Okay. Great. Yeah. Thanks everybody for joining as well. I want to talk to you about, designing inside the box instead of designing outside the box here at Adyen. And you might be wondering, what is that box? What he's talking about? And to tell you more about that, I need to introduce to you our 4 stakeholders that we have when we design payment experience here at Adyen. These are the 4, and I'm going to go through them now one by one. First are our merchants, our customers that we sell our product to. And there we have to say we have actually a very wide variety of industries, from fashion retail over travel to food and beverage and hospitality and many more. But also different sizes, like we have customers that actually have platforms and resell our service, for example, as theirs to SMBs, but also big enterprise customers. Then the second stakeholder is, of course, Adyen, the business that we are working for. We want to have a business interest in that. And to maybe add a bit more, in case you don't know Adyen yet, because we are a financial service provider with an origin in payment services, actually. So we are processing payments for a lot of different brands and companies. Now you see someone here on the screen. We have our origin in e-com, so online. But then in 2014, we also started adding in-person payments to our offering. Yeah. After that, we go back to our stakeholders. Then the third stakeholder that we have, card schemes or payment methods, and also local or regional regulators like countries. Card schemes are, for example, big global ones like Visa, MasterCard. And then you also have local card schemes, for example, Girocard or Carbon Care or Bankkontakt. And then last but not least are, of course, our end users. And then we have different names for them depending on the industries, shoppers, guests, customers, which also, of course, have a wide variety of different people, not in age, in social cultural background, as well as we are actually processing in-person payments in 24 countries globally. So you see, like, all these different stakeholders have a lot of different changing like requirements and needs. And that is, so to say, the box that we are continuously designing and we find ourselves navigating. And myself, I've been in that box since, I always said, 2017. So maybe a little like aspect what happened since then. As I said, I joined in 2017, was also, and didn't have product design or UX design on a big scale yet. But then in like beginning 2018, we came up with our organization and we formulated our first design system, which we not very creatively called Agent Design Language, ADL. And then it was actually just me back in the days working on payment terminals. And then I adapted that for our payment terminals. And the first device range I actually was involved launching was our Engage device range, which is currently our majority of our fleet. And then over the years, we added new payment methods and features. We rolled out in new countries like in Brazil and the US, like lately in 2022, also in Japan and Mexico. And then over the years, I was also actually involved in some of our own hardware projects. We launched our first own design hardware in 2022. And then last year, we actually were busy, like the platform team or the web team was creating a new design language for us, and they call that Bento. And we, the team that work on our payment terminals, we also adapted that to our payment terminals, which we call Akiban. So yeah, wide variety of different projects. So you can see, it was like over the years, I hit quite some like challenges and walls when actually designing that space. And I learned with each project and with each new feature, how to navigate the space. But in the meantime, from 2017, actually grew. Like when I joined, we were around people globally, and now we are over around 4,000. And the amount of devices that we actually have in the field grew from 30,000 to almost now 500,000 devices deployed in the field. And then, of course, with the company and the growing and the business growing, also new people joined the team. And they, of course, also started hitting those challenges. And of course, it's also partially nice, or not nice, but like it can be beneficial to like face challenges and solve it yourself. But of course, it's not the most effective way if many people always have to face the same problem again and again. And that's also what we saw happening a bit during our UX reviews. Sometimes we discussing things which we already had discussed before and aligned on. But also it's very difficult for new joiners to have all that knowledge that the rest of the group has. And also in collaboration, sometimes if you start collaborating with someone, people had different like amount of knowledge. And that can, of course, also lead to not very effective collaboration or even some friction. Additionally, we also, for example, have, of course, stakeholders changing or not. We have a product team, for example, or the dev team. And of course, we try to educate them around, okay, what are our values and underlying principles? But also these, of course, are changing. So we were wondering, like, what could we do to help us make this more scalable and make us more effective? And as a solution, maybe you couldn't formulate these principles together, came up as a solution or as a proposal. And yeah, that's basically what we did. And how did we do that? We did it as a team. Really involved the relevant people from that work on payment or transaction experiences. We gave ourselves the time. We started a bit brainstorming. It was a very informal process. We started refining things, but we also continue to share it with the wider team, with the wider org, to just make sure that they agree with the things that we come up with. Then secondly, it was very important for us to root them deeply in our work. So we reviewed the work that we already have done in the past, our user journeys, considered what is important for our stakeholders or users throughout these user journeys. We also looked at other principles that we have inside our organization, like the overarching UX principles, but also our Adyen formula, which is very important and really deeply in the culture of our organization. But we also looked at good industry examples and what do other big players do or other design orgs to create relevant UX principles. And then the final step was like, we really wanted to make sure that they matter. So we continuously discussed and refined them. We brought in content design to help us with how exactly they're worded. We tested the principles against our own designs. And then we really made sure that we made them relevant to our work. What that means, I'm going to come on a bit later. Like, how did we actually show that? Let me introduce to you our transactional UX principles, or as we always say, because we don't have much time, so we abbreviate it to TXUX principles. I'm now going to take you through them one by one and explain them to you and how they're relevant to different stakeholders. And then we're going to have a look at an example from like how did we apply it in the field. But maybe you will know, especially later on, that actually a lot of the examples I'm going to show actually involve all of the principles. And that's actually just shows that they're very relevant to all of our work. So the first one is we create trust and foster confidence. So what does that mean? So we added this little line to show actually what does it mean for us. We show all relevant information during transactions so users feel informed and in control. So the main stakeholder obviously here is really the shopper, the end user, because it's their money or not its finances that we're talking about. So we really want to make sure that they feel like informed to make the right decisions quickly. That happen. And so the main stakeholder is the end user here. But actually, by making sure that users are set up for success, we make sure that they actually complete the payment, which is very important to our merchants, our customers. And then again, that's also important to us because if people actually are able to pay, also Adyen makes no money. So how does that look like? Let's go to. So the example I want to tell you about is currency conversion, or DCC, dynamic currency conversion. It's a product that's enabled by card schemes and is very highly regulated. And so when you would encounter this, for example, you would be traveling to a foreign country, and then you would maybe even first at the airport buy something at the duty-free store. And then you would try to pay, and it would offer you to either pay in the local currency or in your home currency. Over the years, we got a lot of feedback, like from the field that shoppers really don't know what to do here. But also we had quite some troubles with the card schemes because this is one of our highest regulated UIs actually that we have. So I'm going to take you a bit through the journey that we had. So when I joined, and this is even predates me, our UI looks like this. So we have the payment amount, we have the exchange rate, we have, where's the exchange rate coming from? We have the markup, and we have two options. And as I said, we actually had quite some trouble, even with this screen already. So on some point, we were like, let's just redesign that from scratch. So now, given our principle, we were asking ourselves, what is missing here? So I sat down with our content designers, and we see here, for example, we have an instruction on top. That's something we can work on. Then we have the option to use DCC or don't use DCC. And then the difference is that for use DCC, you get a lot of info. You get the exchange rate, you get actually the markup you're going to pay, etc. But then there's no actually hint what the other option is going to entail. So that is basically what we took as starting point. So we made the content a bit more human, like you say, pay in Swedish crowns or euros, and then we have the two options. And then we added the information that we have available, to both options, so that we can deliver as much information as possible to the user. Unfortunately, I have to say, we cannot say much here. For example, it's just the exchange rate and fees of your bank may apply, but at least it gives more transparency than not giving you any information. So that is basically what we then translated into our UI. And that was our initial design. And then to also demonstrate a bit that this is a very controversial screen, then, for example, then a request from our commercial or merchant side was done, can you not make that option that where we benefit, can you make that more prominent? So actually shoppers are more eager to do, because that was not an option for us, but also actually the card schemes have very tight rules on this UI when it comes to steering. Unfortunately, they're a bit inflexible. So in the end, we actually ended up with this screen. And then you see we actually had to compromise a bit, because one of the requirements for the screen is that all the text that is related to the options needs to be the same exact weight, size. And that kind of was difficult for us because we also, of course, need to make sure that we pass certain accessibility requirements. So yeah, we could unfortunately not apply a lot of visual hierarchy here. But interestingly, and that's just to see what's like, such a screen would be compliant. So something that's completely not readable would be compliant with the card scheme rules. But yeah, we really tried to also to collaborate there with the card schemes to like argue with UX and accessibility, but unfortunately, we were not met with a lot of flexibility. So yeah, that was the example for our first principle. We create trust and foster confidence. Let's move on to the next one. The following principle is we are brief to invisible. So what do we mean with that? We optimize for as little interaction as possible to keep our flows efficient and fast. Best case scenario, users barely notice us. This is actually like mostly relevant to our merchants, not because especially if you think about restaurant or fast fashion retail, they really care about how long a payment takes within their checkout process. And of course, also users do actually want to have a frictionless and short payment experience. Not you just want to pay for your burger. You want to just get that piece of clothes, etc. And of course, also Adyen actually does care. The more transactions we can process in a minute or in a second, the more like revenue we can make. So how does that translate to our work? Let's look at the next example. Yeah, the next thing I want to bring to you is actually installments. I don't know whether you're aware, but actually in certain countries, you can actually pay in installments in a store. So you can decide, I want to pay this over multiple rates or months, etc. And then, for example, this example is issuer-based installment that also, for example, used in Poland. And then the card scheme has a suggestion that when it comes to steps, to first ask to pay in installments, then select an option, then confirm that installment plan, and then basically continue or finish the transaction. And then in comparison, what we always strive for is basically to minimize the amount of steps necessary. So luckily, this was just a suggestion of the card scheme, so no regulation. So we basically combined the two steps of asking whether you want to pay in installments and selecting the option to take one of the interactions away. And then a similar example that we have is also related to installments, but in Japan and Brazil, Mexico, and Japan, where the usual flow is also that you first select an installment plan, then you confirm the installment plan, then you still have to do cardholder verification, like entering your PIN, and then you go to authorization. And one thing that we like to do is actually that we combine the cardholder verification and the confirmation, so we have one step less. So during the PIN entry, we just show the information or the details about the installments plan. Yeah, vary a bit per country, especially Japan is very different from Brazil and Mexico, but that's the general idea. That's for our second principle. Jumping back to the presentation. Third one is we keep things simple. We design straightforward transaction flows without any unnecessary kitchen fluff. If it does not have a clear benefit to users, do we need it at all? This is really a principle that is about, again, very aware that we work in finance, in money, and we don't know the context of a transaction. We really try to keep our product minimalistic, so we make sure it fits in the different contexts it's used. That is beneficial for users because we also, for example, want to make sure we keep the mental load low so that they can make conscious decisions. But also, for example, as I said, we have a lot of different industries that we serve, like from food and beverage to retail to hospitality. And also, for example, from SMB, but also to high luxury. So we really need to make sure that our products fits all the different contexts. Let's go to the example. Actually, it was a bit difficult to come up with an example which is super concrete because it's so fundamental and so embedded in everything that we do. So actually, I just had a very how some apps around payments actually like to celebrate the end or not. And that, of course, can be very nice. And we also really try to add delight to our experiences, but we are always very aware whether it's appropriate for the situation or not. Could it be interpreted? Could it end up in the wrong context? And yeah, examples are just a bit like our UI and how it looks. Now we really try to keep it very clean and very minimalistic. So users know what they need to do. Also, for example, when it comes to the copy, we really try to keep it concise and very accessible to not use a lot of technical terms. Like a good example, for example, is also card application selection, which indeed sounds very, but what is that? Many people don't know what a card application is, that a physical card can have multiple application on it. But instead of actually saying that, we just say select option to keep really the mental load low and really only focus on the task, because what is matter is the options that are presented to you, not what it actually technically is. Yeah. Then also maybe to just show it a bit more. And the similar in our online checkout product, we really try to keep the aesthetic very minimal and clean to make sure it actually fits the business context of our merchants, and it also just is it's clear for the user what they need to do. That was the third one. Let's go to the next one. We design familiar and outstanding experiences. So what do we mean with that? We localize our transaction experience towards what is common in the market. At the same time, we keep pushing existing standards to make them stand out. What does that mean? So as I said, we process in 24 countries globally, and especially in-person payments are something that's very localized. They started somewhere in the 1960s to happen, like digital payments, card payments in stores. And from there, they were not as common and shared as online transactions. So what we see when we go to a country, that we have a lot of local payment methods or local payment features, as I already gave an example for installments. And it's important for us that we meet these expectations that the shoppers have to a certain degree. Of course, we also have a global solution, so we need to also sometimes make trade-offs. But yeah, by doing so, we make sure that our users can succeed, our end users, that the merchant's going to get their money, and we make money in consequence as well. So how does it look like in practice? Example I actually worked recently on last year is actually a payment method that's only used in Germany, I think. And I'm German, by coincidence. So it was very interesting for me because I was not aware that this payment method exists at all. It's just SEPA direct debit on payment terminals. So it's a way to basically extract from the local card scheme, from the gyro card, IBAN, and then basically do a direct debit to that account. And how I experienced it myself when living in Germany was always, you would use your card and then you were prompted to sign for a very long time still, even though no PIN was already a thing and it was seen as more secure. And the thing is that you will always sign on back of this receipt, and there was always a lot of fine print, which is actually the mandate or that you are allowed to that they're allowed to direct debit the money from your account. But of course, even though this has been around for a very long time, longer than I think it should have been, of course, also payments provider in Germany started innovating. And when we go to a local market, we also always see what our competition, of course, is doing to see, okay, should we match that? Can we do better? And what we were finding here is mocked up an example is that basically they almost translated the same experience from the receipt to the screen. And as I said, I never actually experienced it or was aware that this is actually a thing. So we really took a step back here and thought a bit more, okay, what is the conceptual model that the user has behind this transaction or not? And for me, it was really standing out that, okay, you are signing here instead of entering your PIN. And after a lot of discussions, we actually decided to go with that, to make that the most important thing about the transaction and put the whole legal copy and mandate thing more to the background. So instead of transferring the receipt experience to the digital screen, we really tried to align the experience of signing for this mandate as much as possible with the normal signature flow that we have already for PCI cards. And then the only difference is that you have here a little information button that you can go to and then see all the details about, okay, who is this company, who's going to debit money from my account, etc. And then, so that was the example from in-person payments. And then similar in online, you of course also try to follow best practices that we see in online checkouts. So we try to match what is expected by the shoppers, so they have experienced as least friction as possible. Okay. And the last one, we are inclusive and accessible, which is a very fundamental principle for us. We make sure our designs are as inclusive and accessible as possible. Our aim is to perform beyond market standards so everyone can use our products. So how does that translate to our work? So we really make sure in our our web app design system, but also the design system for our payment terminals, that we have good accessibility by default. So we make sure that the font sizes that we use are as accessible as possible, trying to match the legislation and standards that are out there. Other things, of course, also touch target size, color contrast, the standard things, but also, for example, that we have multimodal feedback available, not that we make sure that we have like distinct and found sound feedback. That's, for example, something we have done recently where we work with a UX sound agency to make sure that the sounds or sound feedback for all the different transaction results, for example, are distinct enough so people can tell the difference, even though, for example, if they are visually impaired. And then something which is a new challenge also for us, we recently started switching from more embedded devices running Linux to Android-based devices, but those devices often only have touchscreens and don't have a physical keypad anymore, which is really a big challenge for accessibility and especially visually impaired people. Actually, I didn't talk about the stakeholders here, but the stakeholders here are actually indeed big legislator like the EU and the US government, but also like national legislation, but also merchants do care more and more that they actually, because they need to, of course, also comply with that legislation, but also the awareness for the need for accessibility is increasing. That was all the principles that we have. And now you may ask, okay, what are the benefits of using those principles? So yeah, for your team, okay, you have a shared knowledge base. So it's way easier to collaborate and have discussions. And onboarding new joiners is way less effort because they have a foundation that they can refer to when they are, okay, why is something designed a certain way? And it really just avoids unnecessary discussions. And for your product, you making sure you keep the quality level that you currently have, but you also create more focus of adding new value instead of reiterating on things that you have been talking about in the past. And then when it comes to way of working, and then especially then looking at external shareholders, there's also less communication around design decisions necessary. And that also allows you, of course, a faster speed of execution. Okay, so all of these benefits are actually quite nice, summarized in a quote with our UX lead actually made last week, which says principles inform design decisions without providing solutions. So it creates a space that is shared, but also doesn't give tight directions on what you need to do. But how do you actually integrate that in a team, you might ask? So listen with the team. Sounds a bit cheesy, but that's what it is. So you should make sure that the team has tools and artifacts available, and knows that things are available, for example, as component in Figma, so they can drag it into their files to have the reference there, like physical things like posters that you can hang in your corner in the office or with the relevant teams. And of course, most importantly, encourage the usage. And not only when you need to talk and discuss and maybe motivate your design decisions, but proactively. So they get integrated into the design flow and exercise. And then especially actually like encouraging people to do that with their stakeholders is going to make that conversation in the future way more smooth. And then in the end, actually, the team should feel comfortable to challenge them, but of course on a healthy basis. If it happens bi-weekly or weekly, then maybe you need to review a principle. But it should be a safe space to say, okay, why do we do this again? And then see whether it's still relevant or not. Okay, that actually brings me to the end. So talking about the takeaways, when to create principles, when I recognize when I start repeating myself in UX reviews, in discussions with people, in discussions with my product manager, then it was like, okay, is there not a better way to maybe create that knowledge foundation that everybody shares? So when you have that, maybe you should consider creating principles. How to create those UX principles? Yeah, really do it as a team. Involve everybody who's relevant, and then really try to root them deeply in your work, your culture, your user needs, and then really make it matter. Formulate them in the way that they're really applicable to your work, and not sometimes you see one word and then maybe it doesn't give you enough context on what that actually means. So then how to utilize UX principles? Like you should create tools and artifacts, encourage the users and challenge them, or allow people to challenge the principles. And then the benefits in the end, happier team, less discussions, a better product, hopefully, and an improved collaboration and output. Right. That was everything I had. Thank you so much. We are also actually currently looking for a senior product designer in our Madrid office in case you're interested. And we actually also have an open position for a tech lead for our design system.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Toby. That was like super insightful. I've got a bunch of questions in my head, but there's also a bunch of questions that come through in the Q&A. I'm just going to start sharing my screen. So just give me 1 second. We'll switch over. Let me just pull the questions up that we had. The first one, if it will appear, let's see. First one is from Anne, which is, at what points do you bring in research? Do you have challenges in speaking with your merchants or customers? So how does that like research process, what does that research process look like?
Yeah, the question from the age is not, yeah, it depends a bit or not. If we have clear guidelines, for example, from card schemes, or we need to implement and we don't have big questions or assumptions to make, then we don't do a big research like exercise or something like that.
Right.
But of course, we have doubts about what we need to build, then we usually try to do that before we start the project and give our UX research team the time to provide us with the insights. We, for example, currently have a big research project running for around tipping on the payment terminal.
Yeah. Interesting. And obviously that culture varies, tipping culture varies so much by country, by regions. There's so much variation within that. So where those options are appearing, and then also all the tax implications that are implicit within that as well. So yeah, that's a super interesting area. In fact, that was one of the questions that's come up. So I'm going to be reading this live. Maybe some of this is answered, but Tiago has asked, regarding tips, how do you balance of promoting tip usage versus creating a quick payment flow? For instance, I've seen other PSPs offer tips on the same screen as the payment screen. Was this considered?
The same screen as the payment screen. We haven't considered that. Also, we have to say, of course, we have a lot of different models and run basically the same software on all of them. So the business logic needs to also, and of course, there's a lot of technicality behind like all the hardware that's in. It would be interesting, I think, if we would have sufficient screen estate on all our models. Unfortunately, I have to say, like just off the top of my head, that's not going to be the case on most of our model ranges that we have.
Yeah, what's the sort of the smallest screen size that you're dealing with in terms of pixel density?
Pixel density?
Or not even pixel, I guess not pixel density, maybe just dimensions. And then
also know the pixel density by heart. The smallest one is 240 width and 320 height in pixels. Very limited. Yeah.
Making sure that you're aligning with accessibility requirements plus all the information that needs to be in there. It's a big challenge.
Add to that with like between, if the smaller screen size, the more we might need to compromise. Yeah.
There's a question here from Bernhard. The machines we type in the information into feel quite bulky and not very user friendly. Did you think about the interaction between human and machine at some point of the process? How can we make this more fun, easier to handle? So I guess this is also about could even some of the transactional principles, are they now starting to take effect into the next generation of like hardware decisions, or like how you're thinking about those?
The hardware itself, I had a moment to process the question. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't very much, like we have now, not as I said, we started designing our own hardware and really tried to also the ergonomics and a bit also the aesthetics, because indeed, like some of the payment hardware out there can look a bit outdated. We certainly like have some control over it, but of course, sometimes it's also we are early in that game.
And then I guess somewhat related to that, and this is maybe along the lines of customization and where, being a payment provider, sometimes there's some aspects of white labeling or customers wanting to be able to brand things themselves. Luke's asked, if one of the key principles is to be invisible, why brand the payment terminal with an Adyen logo? Does this create a trust barrier with consumers when two brands are present prominently on a payment terminal? I mean, my perspective on that is that it can also be a trust thing in the positive sense. So it's one of those like challenges between the two, but I'm sure those kinds of considerations come up for you, right?
think it's a constant challenge that we're facing also with indeed with the diverse set of customers we have. Indeed, we have customers actually say like even like platforms that resell our services as
Yeah.
that they like to have our logo present because they think we are like, indeed we are a sign of trust and innovation as well. But indeed, like others don't want to have it. Of course, platforms, especially that when we sell our services as theirs. But of course, there's always this push and pull between commercial because of course it's also about lead generation and it's always a dance, to find the right balance there.
A question here from Murray saying, how do you manage the dialogue with other designers when they produce something that looks awesome but doesn't adhere to the principles? Surely that must be a tricky discussion to have. We had a conversation about this thing about design crits. So I'm interested to maybe dive into a bit about the principles. I know that it's still fairly early on, but it'd be interesting to see how some of those conversations go.
No, we actually also sometimes really give ourselves the room to just not adhere to the principles and just explore or not what could the next generation of a feature of our general payment flow or hardware look like. But of course, then sometimes there is a moment that you need to edit it down. So I think we always try to like facilitate these conversations or not. We don't
Yeah.
like because sometimes to me there's a valid point or a valid like innovative thought there. But in the end or not, we need to make sure, like I said, it's a payment product. And like as I said, like the example is like putting that actually is a example that happened like confetti on a screen. And that can be very nice and delightful in some situations, but not every payment is a happy experience. Yeah, that's I think no, I think usually people are open to reason or not. And then, as I said, but in the end, of course, the principles are there to guide us to create a consistent product. So if it's really contradicting with the principle, then we need to see whether the principle is still okay. That's really a challenge then to the principle as well. Yeah.
So it's almost like when you're thinking of next generational things, there's maybe more of an explicit bandwidth to be able to test and flex things that might sit outside of the principles. But being knowledgeable of when that opportunity is there, because it's something which is branded internally as this is an innovation exercise versus this is something that is more business as usual. And we have a greater pressure to be able to deliver this kind of feature that we know is about compliance or is about something that's changing within the industry. It's interesting where those tensions line up because often business can be like, come up with something innovative in this case. So now it feels like we put all these things to the side and we do go really wild, but it's then often cherry picking some of the aspects that come out of that would not have come had you been constrained by it. But having
Yeah.
those core principles for the vast majority of the work the rest of the time. Yeah.
It depends on the scope and of the,
Yeah.
do you have a lot of time for this? Can we go wild? Do we have a tight delivery deadline? Or then it needs to be a merchant is waiting on it because like it was already promised to them or something like that. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a
There's a question. Oh, sorry. Yeah, then it depends. There's a question here from Patrick about great that how you're looking into accessibility. Do you have a dedicated team that looks into ensuring your product is accessible friendly
no, we
on
don't
the
have a
team
dedicated.
trend?
No, we don't have a dedicated. Well, as I said, it's very foundational to our work. Our design system is, for example, defined to be as accessible as possible within our constraint. We also do actually do accessibility, like assessment of our products with our payment terminals, as well as with our online product. So our online product even scored a 100% like score on that recently, which is very kudos to our designer there. And our payment terms actually also score fairly high, given the restrictions that we faced. We currently have actually even an assessment of that new accessibility mode that we have available that we started building for touchscreen only devices. Yeah.
Amazing. Actually, there was actually a question on that topic of accessibility that came up in the chat earlier. Is there anywhere where we can listen to the different sounds that your team has been working with to develop out? Is there like a YouTube video that links all of them together?
Actually, I'm not sure. Like the first time we used these sounds now on the NSA one card reader that was also mentioned during the presentation, and they're going to be available throughout our devices in the future. But of course, it's a gradual rollout, and then as far as it's new devices, we could get those then with the existing ones. Yeah.
Cool. I think that's the kind of thing that would be a really interesting case study to look at because sound design as part of UX design is a fairly infrequent exercise for a lot of designers, but I'm sure very interesting because obviously it's something that we're attuned to from an environmental factor. So yeah, that's really cool. A question here from Giona about, do you use illustration at all in your experiences? If so, how do they function in the system?
Not in the shopper or transaction experiences. We do use illustrations in the more operational parts of the terminal in the setup flow or network setup, those things, we try to add some delight to the experience of the operator of the device.
Nice. Yeah, I think often illustration ends up the distinction between illustration and iconography can often be that like clear separation between the two. Sometimes it can become more functional and play that more functional role. But if we're dealing specifically with screen sizes that are that small, then often illustration has to sit to the side because there's not enough space to be able to explore some of those things.
But we actually
Um,
got transactions, and actually we do try to play around with indeed more iconography or pictographs to, for example, indicate the card interactions or not where to tap on the device. Not like currently you have a lot of different hardware, not where's the contactless antenna on that device, not to make that more
yes.
clear. So we try to leverage that, if it makes sense, but we don't just add an illustration because this looks nice. Because indeed, usually we are hitting somewhere. Depends also a bit on the context. Actually, not true. I used one in our
Oh yeah.
donation. Our donation product, we actually added a little nice illustration to say thank you for the donation. Yeah. So less serious transaction processing. Yeah.
And that's maybe the opportunities where there's delight, right? So that's where you know what type of transaction it is that's taking place. And that's where you can go beyond something that's necessarily just considered simple and bring that element of delight in. It's really cool.
And I think it was also really just, we needed it functionally because we wanted to give that user a bit that you did something good to give them some for the effort that they donated. Yeah.
A question from Lydia, and this is an interesting one about balancing some of those transactional principles. Do you have issues balancing transparency and at the same time trying to make steps invisible? So I guess that's interesting, a bit like with the example of the German payment specifically, where you have to basically hide some of that information to make that simpler.
Yeah, indeed. For example, that example, we have an ongoing discussion or not, because of course our competition puts it all out there and we want to first go all the way. And luckily, I have to say, the product team was really open to that suggestion or not, because we were like, do the people actually care how the payment is actually processed in the end or not? Many people just really want to pay for their goods or pay for their services that they receive and then go their way. So indeed, it's always, but there are even ongoing discussions right now. But of course, we try to put something out there, see how it performs, see what feedback we get. That's basically also what we always say with launch fast and iterating. We try to do educated guess, follow best practices, and then see how it performs, and then, if necessary, iterate on our approach.
I'm just scrolling through to see some other examples within this. How important is sound design in your design? I have very bad experience with inappropriate sounds while paying from Lukash. I'm interested to know what those inappropriate sounds are. But this example that you had of payment, prior to that, has there been any other examples, or was that the first instance of it?
No. So in general, of course, it's more my experience. I don't have any data on that, but I would say actually the sound feedback on a payment terminal is the most important feedback, because for many people, like a lot of our work is like more of a utility, and if long as it's good, goes well, people are really not going to notice it, because they're like, it's paying for your things, not you. It's a service. It's very underlying. But if it goes wrong, then you should pay attention. So making that difference also clear in sound, because many people really just hold their card and walk away. But we also get reports from, for example, I had occasions where we had to, a bit discuss with our merchants, like the contactless card beep, that people walk away because it's approved. But that beep, for example, that is something actually that falls under certification and needs to, of course, you have with contactless, you don't have any physical feedback. In other words, you don't insert your card, you don't swipe your card, you just hold it there. So how do you know it's successful? That's the reason that the EMVCO, the regulator on this, actually came up with this principle of having these 4 visual cues, 4 LEDs, and the sound feedback to make clear, okay, the card was successfully read. But that doesn't mean that the transaction is yet successful. So that was an interesting discussion with one of our merchants.
Yeah, it's obviously when you're using like Google Pay or Apple Pay or something where there's haptic feedback and sound on the device, that's also, again, that same step of, it's not necessarily that the transaction has gone through, it's just that initial payment has been taken. So then there's almost like where you're thinking of conflicting sounds, or depending on how quickly that transaction can take place, but making sure that there isn't some, the gap between those.
A lot of requests from merchants, can you not add a sound here? We have a problem there. And then we always
Mm.
need to really be also very conscious, okay, how much sound do we add or how much sounds do we have? Because if you just use a lot of them, it's just inflacious and then they all lose their meaning. So yeah. Yeah, very,
Yeah.
very.
I think we'll take one more question if you're happy to. Let me just see if I can grab another one from down here. So I'm sorting them by most upvotes so that I can get the most, the one that is most popular. There's one from Carolina here saying, great presentation, Toby. I wonder how you tie your design principles to the design system. How does that work in practice?
To the design system. And I think what is most, I think also, which came a bit back in the examples, not where our design system is mostly involved, is really when it comes to the way it works, and not that we have a very minimalist design in our design system and our components and what we have and our font styles, etc. And then also, of course, accessibility is a big one, not like making sure that our color tokens have enough contrast ratio by default. So we really don't want to rely on an accessibility mode to make things accessible, but we already want to be fairly accessible by default. And then the accessibility mode is supposed to even enhance it to a higher degree.
Yeah, I think being able, particularly for, just different forms of visualization in terms of like high contrast mode and not just obviously just supporting things like light and dark is critical within that. Thank you so much. I'm just going to go to the next couple of slides. There was a couple of call outs asking if you would be happy to share your presentation at some point. I don't know if that's going to be possible, but if it is possible, we will put a link to it inside the YouTube video. I'm just going to go to the final couple of slides. Thank you everyone so much for joining. This has actually been part of a broader series that we're doing. We've got a report that we've just released that's called Redesigning Finance. So if you're working in this sector and you're interested about these things, either scan this QR code or go to this bit.ly link and you can download a copy of that report. And that's everything. Thank you so much to Toby, delivering a great presentation. And thank you everyone so much for coming. We've got a bunch more events. We've got one next week that's going to be with the Just Eat team talking about the use of dev mode and design system that they built. So yeah, please come along and join for some future sessions. Thanks again.